Greetings, Lumineers, and welcome to 10 Rules You Might Get Wrong in Disney Lorcana Archazia's Island. Here, I will go over 10 new rules or interactions that have come up thanks to brand new card designs and mechanics, as well as walk through how they might work and what they do to make sure that you or your opponent don't get them wrong at your next event. First, let's get a quick one out of the way, dual ink cards. Now, I already made a video talking about this, but the short version is dual ink cards can only be played in a deck that contains both ink colors, meaning that you cannot put that sweet new Steel Amethyst Mufasa card into a Ruby Amethyst deck. That would be representing 3 colors of ink in your deck, and this is not okay. Next, we're going to look at specific card interactions, and we're going to start off with number 2, Ratigan, Nefarious Criminal. Now, Ratigan has the ability A Marvelous Performance, which reads, whenever you play an action while this card is exerted, gain 1 lore. And the ruling question here is, can you use him to sing a song and then gain the lore from him singing that song because he's exerted? Well, the answer here is yes. Using Ratigan to sing a song is part of the cost of playing that song, and playing the action is what triggers the ability for A Marvelous Performance to go into the bag. The ability checks if Ratigan is exerted. He is, so you gain 1 lore. However, this could lead to some confusion if the song that he's singing affects his own status. More specifically, if he tries to sing something that readies himself. So we're going to look at the example of Try Everything. If he tries to sing that song, A Marvelous Performance is triggered and added to the bag. The song would then need to fully resolve while the ability waits in the bag, which would ready Ratigan. Then, you would go to resolve Ratigan's marble from the bag and gain 1 lore. There is no intervening if condition to Ratigan's ability, it just goes into the bag and waits to resolve. It does not check again on resolution. Number 3. Next is a fundamental change to the way that we use ink. Pongo Dear Old Dad has the ability, Found you little rascal, which says, at the start of your turn, look at the cards in your inkwell. You may play a puppy character from there for free. Now, while you don't have to play the puppy, you do have to look at your ink, which introduces a bunch of questions, not the least of which is how this will affect if you use ink tokens. What's important here is Rule 854 of the Comprehensive Rules, which states, players can arrange the cards in their inkwell in any comfortable and convenient fashion, provided the ink cards are kept face down and separate from cards in all other zones at all times. The number of cards in the inkwell and the number of them that are ready cannot be hidden from other players. And a possible issue arose where it may or may not be in conflict with Tournament Rules 4.1. which is the section about written notes that explicitly states not being permitted to use writing or dice to track inkwell cards, among other things. However, Kyle from Ravensburger has stepped in to offer some clarity on the situation, stating, correct, this is not note-taking. Just like a player could attempt to organize their inkwell in different costs in different piles, players have always been allowed to do this. So 2 quick final things before moving on. 1, if for whatever reason a puppy card were in the inkwell when it was exerted as ink, it would still enter readied, as it is considered a new card, and its ink would be still drying until your following turn. And 2, if you are using ink tokens of any kind or some sort of object in addition to the cards in your deck that you track as ink, it just needs to be declared which of your face-down cards are exerted or not, if any, before looking at them. Number 4, Lilo and Pongo. Now, if you heard any of the previous explanation and immediately thought of Lilo escape artists, you are not alone. It's not necessarily complicated, but you do have more than one way to resolve this, and let's take a look now. Lilo escape artists has the ability No Place I'd Rather Be, which says, at the start of your turn, if this card is in your discard, you may play her and she enters play exerted. Per the Comprehensive Rules Guide 4214, Lilo's start of turn trigger enters the bag, as does Pongo's. As cited, effects that trigger at the start of your turn and at the beginning of your turn trigger but do not yet resolve. Per Rule 873, those marbles enter simultaneously, and we are directed to 4223, which states, effects that would occur at the start of the turn and abilities during the ready step are added to the bag, then all triggers are resolved. And from Rule 874, marbles within the bag can be chosen and resolved in any order the active player chooses. So, at the beginning of your turn, Both of the abilities go into the bag, and then you get to pick how you want them resolved. If you choose to resolve Pongo first, you will look at your inkwell. You may choose to play a puppy from them, and then put your ink back. Then, choose to resolve Lilo by using any of your remaining ink to play her. However, if you resolve Lilo's trigger first, her ability will allow you to exert 2 ink to play Lilo. Then go to Pongo's ability, where you would look at your ink, being mindful to track which one was exerted and which one wasn't, and you can choose to play a puppy from them. If you kept mental or organizational track of any puppies in your inkwell, you could very well exert one of those puppies to pay for Lilo, then play that puppy out. It still leaves you with 1 less ink, but it also leaves you with only 1 exerted ink instead of 2. Number 5, Lilo Escape Artist and Bolt Superdog. Lilo with the new Bolt Superdog works in a similar way, but a little quirkier because his ability, Mark of Power, which states, whenever you ready this character, gain 1 lore for each other undamaged character you have in play, triggers in the ready phase. But thanks to 4223 that we mentioned earlier, all marbles that are added at the start of a turn and during the ready phase all enter the bag together before resolving in your chosen order. And again, you have options for how you want to resolve this. If you resolve in the order of Lilo first, then Bolt, Lilo would be in play for Bolt to see her as an undamaged character, and you would gain that lore. Number 6, Vanishing, featuring Iago, Giant Spectral Parrot. Next, we're going to look at one of the new mechanics, Vanish, using Iago as our example for how the mechanic interacts with various cards. First, Fire the Cannons. Now, Fire the Cannons deals 2 damage to a chosen character, and when Iago is chosen by Fire the Cannons, the Vanish ability will trigger from being chosen. That ability goes into the bag and waits for the card to fully resolve. When Fire the Cannons is done, 2 damage will be on Iago, and then we go to resolve the Vanishing trigger. Since Iago was chosen, the trigger fully resolves, and Iago is banished, even though he only has 2 damage on him, despite having 6 willpower. This will be true for just about every action that chooses Iago, but we'll look at some weird cases too. Specifically the card Brawl, that sees play in tons and tons of decks. This card would work in the same way that Cannons does, if you were allowed to choose Iago with Brawl. Because Brawl requires that the chosen character have 2 strength or less, Iago is not a legal target for Brawl. And if a player attempts to play Brawl, they would have to choose a legal target for it. That includes their own if it's the only legal target. If there are no legal targets, Brawl will attempt to resolve as much as it can, which will mean fizzling and going to the discard pile, not doing anything if there are no other legal targets for it. Another interesting interaction comes with We Don't Talk About Bruno. It's a weird interaction because the card needs to resolve fully before you get an opportunity to resolve the triggered Vanish ability. Because of this, Iago would be returned to hand and then either stay there or get discarded by its effect. So after fully resolving We Don't Talk About Bruno, Iago's Vanish ability attempts to resolve, but Iago is already gone, so there's nothing to banish. The particular result is the same for any other action that would otherwise remove Iago from play before the Vanish ability resolves. And notably, this does not trigger if it is targeted by an ability, only an action, or song, which is also an action. If you attempt to choose Iago with the ability Skirmish from Robin Hood Capable Fighter, dealing 1 damage to it, that wouldn't do anything because it's not being chosen by an action. That is an ability. So the Vanish doesn't ever trigger because it's not being targeted by an action. Number 7, The Return of Hercules. Any fans of Magic the Gathering will immediately recognize this as show and tell, and it functions pretty similarly here. It's not super complicated or convoluted, but just some very specific rulings that require knowing who the active player is and resolving those accordingly. The most important thing is that the active player resolves their portion of the effect first, then continues in player order until all players have resolved their effects. They do not happen at the same time, they happen in that order. If any enters abilities would be triggered during this process, all of them are added to the bag and they will not begin to resolve until after all players have fully resolved the card's effect. Then, any effects added to the bag during this process are resolved as they would normally be, which means the active player resolves all their triggers first in the order that they choose, and then the other players in player order. To create a pretty tricky example, let's say that the board is currently empty. I am the active player, and I choose to play Maleficent Monstrous Dragon out. I play it for free, and her Banish ability marble goes into the bag. The opponent then chooses to play a Prince Naveen. Upon playing, his ability, It's Beautiful Note, goes into the bag. Return of Hercules is finished fully resolving because both players have put something into play, and there are multiple marbles in the bag. As the active player, I choose to resolve mine first, and I use the Dragonfire ability to banish Naveen. I have no more marbles in the bag, so the next player in player order which is my opponent, then goes to resolve Naveen's ability and chooses to play the song Along Came Zeus, choosing my Maleficent. 5 damage is dealt to Maleficent, and Maleficent gets banished. So when all is said and done, the entire board is clear and all 4 cards are in their respective discard piles. Fun! Number 8, Donald Duck Flustered Sorcerer. Now this is a weird one. This one basically reads, opponents need 25 lore to win the game. It seems so simple, doesn't it? Well, this is a static ability that is in effect as long as Donald is in play. The important thing here is that this is replacing the normal amount of lore that would be required to win. It's not increasing it by 5, it is replacing the number 20 with 25. With that in mind, you would still need to satisfy all of the game state checks for victory as outlined in Rule Section 1.9 on game state checks. In simple terms, it's just changing the value of 20 in Rule 1911 to 25. But the complication comes from, well, what if 2 players each have a copy in play? What happens then? What happens if they both leave play and one or both players are above 20 lore? It's not as crazy as it seems, and let's take a look. Let's say both players have a Donald in play. I am the active player, and I'm at 22 lore. My opponent is at 23 lore, who also has a Donald in play. I play Be Prepared. What happens? Well, Be Prepared resolves fully and banishes both Donalds. A game state check happens and is looking for any win-loss conditions. Both players will have the required action of winning the game seen during this check. Because both required actions happen at the same time, as outlined in 1921, they would resolve in turn order, meaning that me, the active player, would win despite having less lore because my game state check occurs first. Notably, Donald's Obfuscate ability has no effect on alternate win or loss conditions, such as losing the game if you go to draw a card from an empty deck. Number 9, Zhou War Hero. I have a Zhou in play, and I challenge my opponent's Tamatoa Happy as a Clam with a Calhoun, and then challenge it again with a Super Goof. What happens? Well, he has the ability Training Exercises, which reads, whenever one of your characters challenges another character, if it's the second challenge this turn, gain 3 lore. First, Calhoun challenges Tamatoa. And as per Rule 744, Zhou's ability has an intervening if that requires an additional condition. So let's look at 2 possible scenarios, starting with the order of operations that was described previously. Calhoun challenges Tamatoa first, and as per Rule 744, Zhou's ability has an intervening if that requires an additional condition, that it's the second challenge, to be checked in order to go into the bag in the first place. It's not the second challenge, so nothing happens and we proceed as normal. They deal damage to each other, resulting in Calhoun being banished and Tamatoa with 3 damage on. And no lore gain from Calhoun because Tamatoa was not banished. Super Goof is then declared as a challenger, and 2 abilities enter the bag, having been triggered from Super Goof challenging Tamatoa. 1 from Goofy and 1 from Zhou. And you may resolve them in any order you choose. Resolving Zhou's first will check if this was the second challenge. It is, so you will gain that 3 lore. Super Goof then resolves his ability, gaining you an additional 2 lore. The damage will be dealt in the challenge, Super Goof will be banished, Tamatoa will take an additional 2 damage and also be banished. So based on how the triggers are added and resolved, you can think of this as a shortcut that they stack together, although appropriately they trigger and resolve individually. But more importantly, as you probably saw, a sequencing blunder lost the possibility of gaining additional lore. If you swap the order around and challenge with Super Goof first, you would still get the +2 lore from Goofy on his challenge, he'd still be banished, but on Calhoun's challenge, you would first get the +3 lore from Zhou's second challenge ability, and then gain the additional +2 lore from Calhoun's ability upon banishing Tamatoa. Number 10, Queen of Hearts Unpredictable Bully. This one is a weird combination of a Tinkerbell Giant Fairy and a Belle Accomplished Mystic. Her ability reads, whenever another character is played, put a damage counter on them. Seems simple enough, but let's see if we can add some clarity just in case. First, it's a triggered ability, so it will use the bag just as any other triggered ability. And like Tinkerbell, it does not choose a character, so it gets around things like Ward. And like Belle, it's not dealing damage, it's adding a damage counter, which means it gets around Resist by placing the damage directly on the character. Because of this, damage is not being dealt, so any triggered abilities that would trigger when a character is damaged also don't trigger. Lastly, if you were to shift another character on top of her, like the Queen of Hearts Sensing Weakness, Unpredictable Bully still sees the new shifted character as being played before you physically place the character onto herself. As a result, the shifted character would enter with a damage counter on it. Alright, well that was 10 new rules and interactions for Disney Lorcana Archazia's Island. Let me know in the comments below which of these was your favorite, did I get any of them wrong, and are there any weird quirky rules I might have missed? Leave your comments below, and as always, stay questing and stay winning. If you enjoyed that, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you want more gameplay or breakdown videos, check out the playlist and recommendations here.